So we've just started the meeting. So good morning. This is a special meeting of the Budget Committee. And the purpose of our meeting is to hear a request for a budget adjustment for the Board of Education for an interim appropriation for the accident, the collapsed ceiling at North Miami School. There's a budget request for $8.1 million, and it is accompanied by a bonding resolution authorizing an issuance of a similar amount of bonds for, again, for this ceiling repair at the North Mianus Elementary School. So welcome to all who are attending. And we will start with hearing some comments. Peter Bernstein, would you like to get started? And if also someone could just alert us, I keep checking here for Tony, but if
She's on.
It's here.
oh, there she is. Great. Welcome, Tony.
Thank
Morning,
you.
Tony.
We waited until, or tried to wait until you were able to log on. Peter, do you want to start out? or
Yeah,
do you
why
want-
don't I kick this off? Thank you very much for scheduling a special meeting. This is not a budget adjustment. This is clearly an interim appropriation for something we've had to react to. I know a lot of you have been on some of the RTM meetings already. You know, we're a little out of sequence because you were all going through your budget and couldn't get the meeting scheduled in advance. So we appreciate you getting this on the calendar this quickly. We hope the BET will actually meet well prior to the RTM, because I know the RTM members are interested in hearing your thoughts on this. So I hope you're able to do that, not the night of the RTM, but before then. Just to level set, and I know, again, you've heard a lot of the information, but just to make sure, we're actually talking about the original 1925 portion of the North Mianus building. There have been some additions onto the back of the building, but the issues that we're talking about are isolated to that original portion of the building. As you probably have heard me say, this is our this is the elementary school with the highest level of enrollment. It's in one of our most densely packed neighborhoods. It's desirable if you're a real estate agent. This is the place you love houses to come on the market because they turn around and they're sold very, very quickly. We are still able to use the other portions of the building that are not affected. We have students in the school. I don't want anybody to lose sight of that. We are still running some programming in that school. Life, health, and safety systems are up and operational in that portion of the building. The Board of Ed voted unanimously to seek funding for a restoration of the damaged portion of the building. We are not trying to add on to that project. I know there's been talk about expanding the scope. You know, if you look out in the future, there's some roofing work that needs to be done there. You know, if you look at the master facilities plan, there's nothing there until after 2030. And quite frankly, that's been pushed out even further based on some recent actions. So, you know, there's nothing that we're going to be doing here that would be, I think, affected by any future potential work a decade into the future. This is not really an opportunity to try to expand this project. It's not what the board wants. It's certainly not what the superintendent wants or the parents or students. The object is to get the students back in the building as soon as possible. That is our goal. Trying to expand the scope obviously adds not just dollars, but it adds time. It also could affect our ability to use the remaining portions of the building. And it's very important that we're able to keep some of those students in the building. So we're trying to minimize the level of disruption here. The level of disruption is great. We've squeezed people into other buildings. We've disrupted the flow of those buildings, and it's not a long-term solution. You know, we are seeking to just bring the building to code. That is the important part, to get it back online. You know, we are trying to move this forward as expeditiously as possible. I know there's been questions about the level of information we have. Until the design work is done, we won't have a better estimate of the price. But what we don't want to be is in a position where we're unable to sign a contract for the construction work to begin. We obviously are out some funding already in terms of the immediate remediation as well as the removal of the roof. You know, I want to thank Megan and the folks who are working with her and working with our staff in terms of the insurance coverage. I know there's some questions about that. We know that they'll cover some portions of this, and for that we're grateful. But for some of this work, it is having to be done, more proactively than the insurance company will cover. But it's necessary. We're very lucky there was nobody in the building at the time of the incident, but we need to prevent any future situations in that building. With that, Sean, I don't know if you want to quickly run through the numbers. I know they have them, and they probably have a lot of questions, and then we can get to that.
Okay. So as I've
Sean,
done over the, sorry?
I was just going to, step back here a little bit. One of the things I didn't do at the beginning of this meeting is introduce our other budget committee members at our meeting, which I normally do at the beginning. So sorry, I guess I too am a little tired. And, we have Andy Deuce here in hybrid Zoom. You can differentiate between those who are in hybrid and those who are virtual by whether you're wearing masks or not. And then we have Leslie Moriarty and Jeff Raymer, on our virtual screens. Also in the town hall meeting room, we welcome Roland Geiger and Pete Minarski, and Mike Mason, our chairman, is also in our town hall meeting room, as well as Jenny Larkin. So I'm sorry, Sean, I just wanted to go through some of that. Normally I do at the beginning, and I failed to do that this morning. Thank you.
All right, thank you for doing that. I'm assuming you've already heard the summary that I've done over the last several days with the RTM committees, so I'll skip that if that's okay.
No, I think it's important that you give us the key elements so that we all have that.
Okay, happy to do it.
Yeah, that would be appreciated.
Okay, so quickly.
And there's some listening public that would benefit, I think, from that too.
Okay, very good. Okay, on Saturday, February 13th, 2021, an alarm was triggered due to water intrusion resulting from a ceiling collapse in a second floor elementary classroom. Immediate response from the GPS facilities department, as well as the Greenwich Fire Department. Simply stated, a plaster ceiling collapsed on top of the sprinkler line, which severed the line and caused a large flood and brought down the hung ceiling. The ceilings, as Peter mentioned, were vintage of 1925 construction, using long nails going through plaster into the structural beams. However, the sprinkler line and hung ceiling during their initial installation were only attached to the plaster itself. This issue was not visible as it was hidden by layers and layers of insulation, and over time, through expansion and shrinkage due to temperature fluctuation, the nails eventually came down by the weight of the ceiling. The interim request will include the emergency remediation response, which includes swift water cleanup, dehumidification, environmental monitoring, removal of instructional items impacted by the flood, shutting off all water to the impacted areas, reestablishing fire suppression systems for the rest of the building, and other work necessary to ensure the building was safe for immediate demolition and construction. The interim request also will cover demo and construction to remove and replace faulty ceilings. So as the engineers went in there, they determined that we would need to fix not only the damaged areas, but also the areas with similar construction, that we would need to demo those areas, which is significant, and then to rebuild them. So there's a considerable amount of work, and that work will not be covered most likely. Also, storage containers to clear out impacted portions of the building, relocate 15 classrooms across the district by professional mover, replacement of some security cameras, and transportation of displaced students from February through June for dislocated students. That's an item that we just, in the 8.1 request, we've just factored in the transportation from February through June. We would likely have additional transportation come September, as well as potential for a rental space. So to the financials, in the damaged areas, the emergency response and the remediation and the demo was estimated to be about 190,000. The rebuild estimate for those damaged areas on the first and second floor is $629,000. And Leslie, I did get the square footage. Dan got that square footage. We'll talk about that in a sec.
Okay, thank you.
For the preventative work, which is required by requested by the engineer, actually required, the demo on the first floor is estimated to cost $627,143. The first floor estimated to be about $333,000. The second floor, $295,000. So the total $627,000. And the rebuild for the preventative areas totaling 16,070 square feet, based on a cost per square foot of 312, would come to a little over $5 million, $5,013,840. So if you add up the damaged area demo and rebuild, the demo for the preventative areas, and then the rebuild for the preventative areas, the total construction cost comes to $6,459,548. We've added in 20% contingency, given there's a lot we don't know. It's $1,291,910. So the total construction-related costs at present $7,751,458. The other costs outside of construction, I mentioned transportation from February through June. That's an estimate based on our daily rate. For 8 buses, it's $307,367. Again, we'll most likely need transportation come September. The replacement of the cameras, security cameras, $19,500. Furniture and fixtures and some equipment that were damaged, $18,700. And then we've had a small amount of incremental staffing at some of the schools to handle the displaced students. That's $12,000. So the total non-construction related is $358,000. Add that to the $7.751 million that I mentioned construction related, gets you to the $8.1 million. That's the request. Oh, and Leslie, you asked about the square footage for the damaged areas. It's I've gotten it from Dan. It's about 16,000 square feet, 16,250 square feet. Now you would say you're probably doing the math and saying 629,000 for the rebuild for the damaged areas, and it's 16,000 square feet. Some of those areas, and I'll let Dan talk to it a little bit. He's much more well-versed on this. Some of those areas in that 16,250 square feet require minimal work. So I just thought I would throw that out there, that we did research that for you.
Thank you very much. I think I asked for 2 numbers, and both the estimate of the number of square feet and then also the dollars per square foot. And so how would we like to proceed now? Would we like
Leslie,
to talk?
if I could just add one more thing before we get into questions. One other item we should talk about, and Sean briefly touched on it. Unlikely the building is going to be able to be fully used by September, so there is likely going to be a need for a second interim along the way for the displacement. I know Dr. Jones can talk a little bit to it, but can't give you all the details because they're currently looking at several spaces. But basically, it would be rent of additional space as well as busing costs. Dr. Jones, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it, Peter. It is looking for location so that we don't have children in 4 different sites. Right now, we're looking at continuing to occupy the existing space at North Mianus that we're occupying now, and then finding space for up to 18 classrooms that are all together. And that's also at the request, obviously, of the principal, just trying to get the school community back together as much as possible.
So Tony, the paperwork says that they're using, I think, 15 classrooms elsewhere. Can you explain what the other 3 are for?
Right. We have 15 classrooms elsewhere, but we also need space for things like music and art and interventionists. And right now, it's even in the displacement, it's been incredibly difficult. Where at Cost Cobb and Old Greenwich, especially, they've given up spaces like your conference rooms and workrooms and principals' offices, and just trying to find space. So the additional 3 rooms are those ancillary spaces that are needed.
And then just, to help me, because I don't think I saw these numbers, can you add or share with us how many students are being retained at North Miamis and how many are being displaced currently? And does that change in September with this other plan?
Basically 50% are displaced and 50% are at North Miami. We have 4th grade, 5th grade, and 1st grade that are displaced right now to other school sites.
And does that remain the same when you find another location?
As far as the percentage, yes. There's some discussion about which grade levels are best to have in an offsite location versus which grade levels would be best to leave at North Miami.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So are we best talking with Dan and then talking with Megan? Is that a good way to approach? Does anyone, Andy, do you have any other ideas? No? Jeff and Leslie, does that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I just had one thought that had come to me. I don't know if it's useful. Is this a good moment to raise something? It really is a question more for Dan. Dan, are there hung ceilings in the remainder of the school, including the 2nd floor as well? Meaning the plaster is behind a hung ceiling?
No.
So Dan, before you get to Jeff's question, can you give us an overview and then we'll have Jeff's question as the first.
Sorry.
After Dan gives us an overview of the comments that he'd like to
Sure,
make.
sorry.
Where would you like me to start?
Well, I think we probably would, appreciate any additional detail or light that you would like to give to Sean's comments and then, or anything that Tony has said here, and then we'll go to Jeff's question.
All right, I'll just start as I've started in the last 5 other meetings. So the issue was the way the classrooms are constructed. Its original plaster ceiling, as both Peter and Sean pointed out, and below the plaster ceiling is infrastructure, meaning electrical fixtures, electrical conduit, sprinkler systems, HVAC lines that are all attached to the plaster ceiling. There's also a drop ceiling, as you can see above my head, similar to what is in just about every classroom. That hung ceiling is also attached to the plaster ceiling. Not exactly the best construction, but you might see it in other places. Go ahead. Somebody have a question? Okay. So in essence, what happened was, as Sean pointed out, over time, the excess weight on the plaster ceiling and also the shrinkage and contraction of the wood released the nails that were holding the original plaster, which is about 2 inches thick, on wire lath and on wood furring strips, separated from the wooden joist that you would see in the attic. So that particular situation where the nails were pulling out obviously wouldn't be visible from below because you've got a hung ceiling, and from above, if you were walking in the attic, it's not only covered by plywood in most locations, but also about 15 inches of insulation. That's why this particular event wasn't noticed.
So, thank you. I think we'll now go to Jeff's question. And then after that, Leslie has her hand raised. And then Andy thereafter. So why don't we start with Jeff?
So, sorry, thank you. Just reacting to the dislocation of placing kids elsewhere while a lot of this work is being done. Is there a possibility that, Dan, that you could think about, or maybe talk to the engineers about whether as a temporary fix, you could put some wood bracing across the underside of the plaster ceilings in the places where the ceiling hasn't fallen, but you're doing preventive work, so that to buy you some time to be able to do that work in the summer?
I mean, we could ask that question. I mean, the way we talked about shoring the ceilings up, just as a matter of construction, the ceilings have to be shored in order to take them down. The amount of shoring that would need to be put in is pretty extensive. And if it's not put in, there's a very good possibility that additional ceilings would fall, just the amount of vibrations in the building with demolition going on. I don't think we've even thought about putting in temporary bracing. I don't know what that buys us.
Yeah, I'm only, I mean, I'm not proposing that as any kind of a permanent fix. I just thought it might create for you the option to be able to do the replacements on the preventative work at times that are convenient for you, meaning the following summer or something of that sort, without having to separate kids from families and from different, fourth graders in one place and second graders in another place, or some of the other terrible stuff that ends up happening with these kinds of dislocations. I don't know. I mean, it's just something which came to me, and I'm no builder, Dan. I leave that for you to weigh and discuss with your engineer or whatever. See if that's a helpful idea. I don't know.
I might just add to, just given how frightening this really was, the idea that a ceiling, fell. I'm not sure that you could get any of us to the point that we would feel comfortable putting children back in there without actually having the ceilings fixed from a safety and security standpoint.
I respect that.
So Jeff, you okay?
Sorry, that's just a thought that came to me. I'm done.
Okay, so Leslie?
Yes, I just wanted to ask a few questions just to get clarification on one, the timing of the expected steps that need to occur, up till now until you can start construction, and then estimated construction. And I know some of that's uncertain. And then to just get a little bit more clarification, we talk a lot about bringing the building up to code, but can you give us any more clarity? So, we have this issue. We know we have to replace what we know is a poor construction methodology in the ceilings. And then we talk about bringing the buildings up to code. Can you identify the kinds of things that you found out already that need to be addressed in the building as part of that work?
Well, first of all, saying bringing it up to code is, I would say it's incorrect. I would say the building was per code, per the time it was built and per the time that the additions were placed on it. The building was fully sprinklered, fireproofed where needed, and things like that. So that's a pretty broad stroke saying bring it up to code. There are some things that we are looking at that are being uncovered as we speak. There's some additional asbestos we're finding behind whiteboards. The glue that's used to hold up whiteboards, glue dabs, it's like a black mastic, is hot. We've only really uncovered it in the one room that we had the event in. That's being abated next week when the kids are out of school. We've talked to some of our own staff, and there's some concerns about plumbing lines and water lines that are hidden within the walls that are circa 1925. If we're at a point now where we can change those lines and protect the assets of the district, we're going to make that part of the project. We are in the middle of a lighting incentive program with Eversource. And it just so happens that North Miami was listed as one of the schools that was going to be worked on this year. So we're getting new lighting for free.
So there's been some statements that things like the way the light fixtures are hung needs to be modified and therefore may take time and expand the cost, that they're above the ceiling but below the roof line, that there aren't separations between the classrooms, and is that going to be required? So there's some outstanding questions, and these are just things that that have been suggested. No real hard information behind it, but to understand kind of the scope, because what you've described so far in the scope in restoring the classrooms is addressing the ceiling problem primarily, right? And that's driving the majority of the cost.
Well, I could expand on what's being done. I mean, everything that needs to be taken out in order to get the ceiling out, meaning all the infrastructure that I spoke of, the sprinklers, the lighting, all that has to be put back. And we're not using old materials that we took out and putting them back in. It's all going to be new. And it's all going to be to current specifications or current codes. And the architect and the engineer working on that are well-versed in that. It's not that you're not going to walk back in that same room and say, there's no change here. It's going to look the same. It's going to have the same pattern. It's going to have the same windows, but it's going to be, to your words, up to code. The lighting, I don't know what code you're talking about. The lighting, I think the issue was that there was no emergency chains to the lights. So if it breaks, it's still held by a chain, so it doesn't swing down. I think that's the only issue with the current lighting. And obviously, if we put anything in new, it'll be to current expectations.
And the requirements going to be placed on the facility is such that the space that you're addressing needs to have all of those repairs done. Does any of the work expand into the classrooms that are currently being occupied, the newer parts of the building?
No. Totally different construction. The rest of the building is, the life systems are fully active and are checked. The sprinkler system obviously is in place. The communications are in place. The security system, the fire alarms are all up and active and will remain that way. And the other building is completely separated by a 2-hour rated firewall that was approved by the building department and the fire department.
And the process for determining the scope of work of getting the building back functioning and online, your architect prepares the specifications and identifies what's being done. That gets reviewed by the building department and the fire marshal. Is that right? Or
it would be just like any other normal project. We would have to go through the same approvals process.
Okay, so we're meeting the standards that are going to be imposed, and it's going to to everyone's satisfaction to know that we're doing the work that we have. Now, the second question I had, because you're being asked questions about the scope of work and whether there are opportunities to address other immediate needs in the building. Peter Bernstein started off this meeting saying the priorities really are the time element to get the students back in the building. It's a disadvantage having this building offline. Certainly the impact on the other classrooms, right? If you were to do a broader project, you would be displacing potentially the whole school, and that causes even more challenges in trying to find correct locations for all of these kids. But the kinds of scope work that you're looking at, for example, if it's a Julian Curtis type of renovation, which hopefully will get started someday, it is expanding small breakout spaces for specials. It is providing more common spaces. It is adding, I don't know if North Miamis is one of the buildings lucky enough to have a science room, but adding those types of facilities. And in your view, those kinds of changes to the building are just not appropriately done at this time, given the other priorities. Just want to confirm that. Maybe that's a question better for Tony or for Peter than it is to Dan.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. We don't support a larger project, and it's one of the concerns that we have, even from the RTM meetings that we attended this week, is there is a lot of discussion that people are saying, go ahead and just do a bigger project. But, generally, when you're doing a major construction project, and you mentioned JC, we would do all of that planning just while school is continuing. And then by the time children are displaced, you have a plan where you're in that building, you get the work going immediately. And we're in a situation where our children have already been displaced since February, and we know it's going to go into the fall. And the other aspect of doing a much larger project is if we started doing a large project, we'd have to go back to the board and do an ed spec. We would then have to, which takes time, we would then have to take that ed spec, submit that to the first selectman for a building committee. Just the process to get through all of that. We discussed it as a team, Dan and Sean and I, and it could be 2 or 3 years. It's not a fast process to get through all of the planning that is required for something of that magnitude. So we really want to get these ceilings repaired, get them fixed, and get our children back in school and get North Miamis all back together again as quickly as we can.
And just to that point, there's been a lot of talk about whether the Board of Ed has prioritized their projects. We certainly have. And this obviously was not something that was of immediate on our radar screen. We weren't looking to do additional work at North Miamis. We certainly have talked a lot about Julian Curtis, Old Greenwich, and Riverside being first on the list, as well as looking at Central. So this is not a major project the board is looking to take on at this point. What we're trying to do is get the students back in the building. That is consistently what our message has been. That is our need. That is our ask.
And if you bear with me, I just have a couple questions about the process and the timing, which I assume Dan may be the best one to answer, but whomever. So we currently, you brought in Werner immediately to help you with the immediate cleanup. How are you structuring the design work and the construction going forward?
How are we structuring it?
Yeah, in the sense of what vendors and processes.
We have we continued with the engineer who was brought in at the immediate after the event. Was an engineering firm called Pistula. They were recommended by the town. Al helped me out with that to get somebody in there right away. We felt moving forward we would keep them on board, knowing that they have the intimate knowledge of what was needed. So they are continuing with the rebuild. And once we have design documents from them, we'll go out for public bid.
Okay, so I've been thinking in terms of an architect, but it's an engineer who's developing.
It's an architect with an engineering sub-consultant.
Okay, and then you'll go out to bid, which we know could take about 3-4 weeks turnaround time. Just to get those documents out there and evaluated and then start the contract process. Is that
correct?
Okay. And the
Leslie, may I just interrupt and ask who the architect is? Is it with a Pistola firm, or is this a separate firm that you use elsewhere?
No, it's a consultant from the Pistola firm. I don't have their information in front of me, but Pistola is the lead on the project.
Thank you.
And then,
Sorry, I just thought it was.
My last question on this part, and then let Andy and Leslie, you ask your questions, but I'd like to be able to go back to the costs and understand those a little bit better. But just on the timeline, that's my last set of questions. What are you looking at or expecting now for when you believe this design phase might be completed and you might be ready to go out to bid? And these are estimates, I know.
Yeah, they're estimates because we are going to meet with them. Actually, they're on site right now. I'm going to meet with them as soon as I get off the line. We spoke yesterday briefly. I asked them to kind of advance their design so that we can get some preliminary estimates from local firms who want to assist us with the estimates. I wouldn't say we would have any preliminary designs for 3 to 4 weeks. I would say hopefully we have a bid package within 5 to 6 weeks, and we're trying everything we can to pull that in. From there, you noted how long it takes to get the drawings out, and then we have to go through contract. It's going to be a couple of weeks before we have a contractor on board doing the actual work.
Okay, so that's really almost takes you into the middle of the summer before you may even be able to start.
Yeah,
the
That's
work.
correct. And that's assuming we get, the contract through on an escalated pace as well.
And until you see the design documents, you can estimate a timeline for construction, which is
That's
clearly
correct.
clearly it goes into the middle of next year. But I know that you were asked a question at the Education Committee, and someone expanded it that it could go until June, but that's probably unlikely given the scope of work you're talking about, but it could be 6 months into the school year. I know that you're still working through that, but
Correct.
okay. Thank you. As I said, Leslie, at some point I want to go back to the dollars, but I can, maybe someone else has other questions of this construction.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Andy, and then I have a couple questions. I want to come back to where Sean was talking earlier, and then we can come back, Leslie, if you want to do that, or we also would like to hear from Megan. So let's, Andy, you had your hand raised.
Thank you, Leslie. And Dan, thank you for stepping in here. I have several questions on the source of the problem here. As I understand, the sprinkler system and also the drop ceiling were attached only to the plaster above and not to the joists above that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you know when both those projects were done?
We
The,
are researching that now. I've been in contact with Megan about that. The latest we have is a set of design drawings that I believe was 1994 or 1995. But as far as when the work took place and who the contractor was, I don't have that information right now.
But presumably these projects would have been inspected by the town before being allowed to be occupied. Is that correct?
I wasn't here then. I couldn't tell you that.
Okay, but there would be, if there were inspections, there would be records of that in town hall, I would hope. But I guess you've not made the inquiry. Anyway, I guess the good news here in the Pistola report, the structure that we have seen here at North Manus is not the same in the other schools of the similar vintage, Old Greenwich, Riverside, and that the problems that we have in North Manus are not seen in those other schools. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Have there been subsequent inspections after the sprinkler system and after the drop ceilings were installed? Have there been subsequent inspections by, I don't know, I presume the fire marshals would inspect the sprinkler systems periodically? Is that correct?
We have in-house maintenance contracts with different sprinkler outfits, and they're checked annually. The fire marshal would obviously do his review of the schools twice a year.
Okay, and that does not entail going up into the ceiling and seeing how these sprinkler systems are actually attached, I assume.
You
Okay,
wouldn't be able to see it anyway. You've got 15 inches of insulation plus a plywood floor in most of the ceiling, in the attic, most flooring.
Okay, so we don't know if they've been inspected. We don't know who the original contractors were. We're not quite sure.
I
when
didn't say they weren't inspected. The sprinkler systems are inspected for how the system works. I couldn't tell you if they were inspected on how they were installed.
And maybe this is a question more for Megan. If there is some culpability identified here for incorrect installation or whatnot from years ago, what recourse do we have as a town to seek compensation for these damages? And
So,
Megan,
sorry,
Go ahead.
Andy.
go ahead, Megan.
So that would really be a question for the law department. We may be outside of the statute of limitations to be able to go after anyone that was involved in this work. That's why we're trying to find out who the contractor was. I have reached out to Bill Maher's department. He has not gotten back to me yet. I don't know. I think he's not until next week. I'm not sure, what his schedule is. I did reach out to John Valerie and ask if he could get back to me, but he may be waiting on Bill Maher. So I am asking those questions of the building department as well as the fire marshal to try and get some of that information because while the carrier, wants that information, whether they'll be able to subrogate or not, I don't know. Whether we'd be able to go after the other individual or the other companies, the vendors, I'm not sure either. Again, that's something that we're going to have to ask the law department to look into if that's an avenue we're taking.
It's been about almost 2 months now since this happened, so hopefully they'll get back to us soon. What generally, Megan, what is the statute of limitations for situations like this?
I'd have to look into that. I'm not I didn't do much in terms of contractual law when practicing, so I don't have that offhand, and I wouldn't want to give dates without researching that. So I
Generally
apologize.
speaking, there's a 6-year statute of limitations on contract.
Oh, darn. Okay.
Thank you, Jeff. I knew it probably was not 21 years, but
Dan, one more question. In the appropriation request, there's a reference to a firm called Werner on 4 rows here. Is that a subset of Pastula, or who is Werner? And that's a question for Dan.
Werner Construction is a construction management firm. They're a local operation, and in fact, within a half a mile of the school, they were very quick to respond to our needs. And unfortunately, they were also quick to respond to our other water infiltration projects.
I've had
Okay.
experience with it. They're a very good firm.
Okay, now are we going to continue to use them, or they be displaced by Pastula's?
No, 2 totally different organizations. One is Werner Construction is a construction management firm. Pistola is an engineering firm that's doing the design. Werner Construction is assisting us with the demolition of the ceiling and the removal of the damaged materials.
And they, we were able to engage them not through the normal RFP process because this was an emergency situation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me pause there. I'll have more questions about expenses, but let me allow Leslie Tarkington ask her questions.
So I just add, Dan, it's correct, right? That the town also uses Warnet on other projects that it does for construction, et cetera. So I think it's a firm that not only the BOE has used, but also the town. Is that correct?
That's
Dan?
correct. That's
Yeah.
correct.
So I want to just ask a couple questions here. I know Leslie has more too, but I want to understand more about, and then I want to, I guess I'd like to go back to Megan and have her give us an overview in terms of the insurance. But I wanted to ask a couple questions in terms of, the estimate to rebuild the damaged areas. I'd asked the question about the square feet here and getting a better handle on what was behind this number. And I think at the beginning of this meeting, we were given a number of something like 16,000 some odd. And can you explain what confused me is, how many square feet is the total square feet of the work to be done, first and second floors in the older building? The first estimate to rebuild the damaged areas, which weren't provided, and not only the square feet, but also the dollars per square foot as projected on this, and then how that compares with the later numbers we are presented with here. So could you just give me some more detail, give us all more detail on that particular number, the 628, 834?
I can, and without, you can't compare apples to oranges.
Okay,
The square
you-
foot, just explain the square footage of the affected areas that were affected by the ceiling collapse and the water infiltration. That I think the area was 16,000 and change. That doesn't mean every square inch of those rooms was affected. For instance, the main room where the event happened, you have a total gut job, ceilings, everything came down. 100 feet away, you still had water infiltration into a room that maybe just affected the base, the wall base, the floor base. And that's, 32 cents a linear foot to replace. So trying to put a square foot number from that, compare it to what has to be done to rebuild is apples to oranges. You can't compare it.
so I'm totally confused. Can you please give me the total amount of square footage of where you intend to do some work? This is 16,000 some odd square feet. And then separately is this number that totals, whatever it is, 5 million plus. Is that an additional 16,070 square feet?
All right, let me just, I'll try to explain to you the
Are you-
areas.
32,000 square feet. What is the total area of this building that's going to be worked on, first and second floors? Do you know that?
I can give it to you if you want to
Okay.
hold on. We get back to that. I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it was, Sean, do you have that document that we were talking about yesterday? What this total square footage was?
Sean, you're muted.
No wonder no one was responding to me. Yeah, I was just gonna say, that's what I just referred to, but now I realize that nobody heard me. The damaged area square footage is 16,250. The preventative areas is 16,070. So Leslie, you are absolutely right. The total impacted square footage is roughly 32,000 plus.
So, sort of keeping along the same area, and I understand, and I'm sympathetic. I think I'm going to go back to Dan here, or you can, both of you, either one can answer. So the other 16,000 square feet, we're given an estimate in this particular request that the cost of the retrofit, whatever you want to call it, is $312 a square foot. And so I was surprised. I couldn't understand why that wouldn't be the same to rebuild the damaged areas, especially if you're now telling me that is, 16,250 square feet. I don't want this project to increase in scope, but I'm trying to get a better handle on the other 16,070 square feet. And the sort of, let's reach into the air and say that costs $312 a square foot. So again, I Dan, you don't have to respond right now to this, but I certainly like that additional information. So
Can I just insert something here? 'Cause I might be creating a confusion that needn't exist. I'm looking at the 2 pages that are called a cost breakdown. The figure for the 237,900 some odd is for a demolition. That's a catch-all word on the second floor, 7,555 feet, and another 268,600 some odd for 8,515 square feet on the on the first floor. You add those together, and it equals the 16,070 that equates to the square footage for the rebuilding cost on the first and second floors, which is the $5 million sum. I had the impression that 16,000 square feet was the total affected area. The first two items are demolition costs on the second and first floors, and the third item is the rebuild cost, and it's all the same 16,070 square feet. Or is that
Right.
just a coincidence of numbers?
Jeff, that's exactly why I'm asking these questions, because when you go back, that says the area that wasn't damaged. And what I'm trying to do is understand why the cost per square foot for what wasn't damaged is $312. And, you know, the cost for what was damaged, the other 16,250 is, and I
I
can't.
think if we allow Dan to actually respond, we
Yeah,
can
sorry.
answer your question.
So let's just start with the $312 number, okay? That is an industry standard number for rebuilding, for new. That's the
Right.
number we threw at it because we don't know the exact scope. Is it
Right.
gonna be that? I sure hope it is, but right now, that's the number we have to deal with until we get design document, all right? So I am with you 100%. I want the project to come down. Right now, I can't tell you that, okay? So as far as the area that was damaged, the square foot number that I gave you, not all of that damage includes removing ceilings. It doesn't include replacing millwork in every room. The main room that had the event, like I said, is a complete replacement. But 100 feet away, you still had water intrusion into a room where we had to remove the base of the wall, that rubber base. It's still in an affected area, but the square foot to replace that, square foot number to replace that is minimal. So you can't compare the two. It's just so happens that the overall square footage is pretty close to each other, and I think that's what's making the issue.
It's more confusing than that, Dan, and I would like more clarification because the estimate to restore the damaged areas, which you're telling me is 16,250 square feet, is around $39 per square foot. And the estimate, you know, that's what you have presented to us. And the estimate to you know, restore the other areas, the other 16,070 square feet, is about 312. So it's you know, close to 10 times that other number. So yes, I would certainly like some further clarification so we can work on that off screen. At this point in time, before I come back to any more questions on this, I would really like Megan to kind of update us, help us on the insurance, because that clearly is going to be something that's going to be important and of interest to all of us. So Megan, can you just give us an update in terms of, I know you've been involved from day one and February 13th. And can you give us an update on what you think we should want to know or should know at this point in time, please?
Yes, so I'm going to share my screen. Let me just, and then get over to I have a short, pretty simple presentation just for those that, you know, like to, are a bit more visual. So we already mentioned the data loss was February 13th, 2021. Just for some background information, the insurance carrier is Chubb. We have a senior claim adjuster, Brendan Burke, who's been assigned. They have also hired a third-party claims administrator, which is Angle Martin and Associates. The claim adjuster with them is Evan Sussman. That's who Dan and I are kind of really dealing with day to day. They also hired an engineer who came in very early on. Dan and his staff were great walking them through, making sure that he got to see, you know, the damaged areas. That's Rick Morris, and he's from JS Held. And the insurance broker, as you all know, is Arthur J. Gallagher and Company, and we have a property specialist with them, Ken Spencer, who is also dealing with this account. So a lot of players that we're dealing with us on this end, but very good communication. So this slide's the preliminary statement of loss. This is the estimate that JS Held I'm sorry, was there a question or was that just background noise?
Background noise, I think.
Okay, just wanted to be sure. So JS Held, Rick Morris is the engineer that came in on behalf of Chubb. He came up with a building estimate. Keep in mind, this doesn't include mitigation costs or any other collateral costs. And this was with his initial walkthrough with Dan and some of the staff. So he came up, this is really the sort of the rebuild of just the damaged areas. His number was $860,939.43. Insurance does take off depreciation because we're putting in brand new, but there was some depreciation to what was there. And that estimate is $130,755.70, which comes off of that 860 or 861 almost. And then the deductible is $100,000 per event. So the net claim for this initial preliminary statement of loss, keep in mind, this is not everything, this is just a portion of it for the building aspect, was $630,183.73. At this point in time, I can say that the insurance will absolutely pay that and more, but the additional, I don't know yet because we don't have all of that documentation. So this has at least been guaranteed. We are waiting on a partial payment. I did reach out again to Evan to see where we are on that, and he is out of the office until next week. This seems to be a very heavy vacation time. So I should be able to have a better understanding of when we will get that payment sometime, hopefully next week.
And Megan, what is, you know, just not specifically to this project, but what is your experience, since we've had many of these projects under your time there? What is your experience in terms of an initial payment? Would you expect it to be soon, you know, in this current fiscal year?
Yes, I would expect the 630,000 at least to be in this current fiscal year. We could get more, however, we've got to get the documentation over what is or has already been provided by the Board of Ed to me through Google Docs, which is very easy. I can go in and live see what's been put in there. That has been provided already to the adjuster. It just takes them a little time to review and get it over to the carrier. So this portion, it will be guaranteed. I will try and get as much as I can as quickly as possible, but I don't have a timeline on the rest yet because we don't have all of the supporting documentation as of yet.
Thank you.
So the next slide is the captured costs. It's broken down in the Google Docs that the Board of Ed shares with me as building or capital. And this is not everything that they may have reported to you today. This is simply what's already been uploaded into the system. So there may be a little bit of discrepancy in numbers. They're obviously going to get some numbers and estimates before I see them in the Google Docs. So just know that some of the numbers may be a little off. This was as of yesterday, what I have access to. So as of yesterday, we had $874,084.83 invoiced in the building and capital section. Transportation, we have $307,366.92. That's the projected total cost through June 2021. And as Sean and Tony both stated, they're anticipating there will be additional costs that hasn't been factored in yet. And we haven't been invoiced those yet because a lot of this is projected. And I will go further into transportation and that coverage in the next slide. The next area we have is furniture, fixtures, and equipment, which we call FFE, and supplies. That's just under $19,000. I do not have invoices on those yet, so we do have these numbers, but as soon as those invoices get put into there, I can provide them to the adjuster, and that will speed up the process of getting the payments on those. For security, this is security cameras, those types of things. It's $19,500. Again, we don't have invoices in there yet, but we'll provide those as soon as we do. We also take into consideration staffing, and I'm just waiting for the staffing numbers to be entered into the Google spreadsheet. So that'll be another number that will be added on there and will be covered. So the total costs that I have reported to me to date and have been reported to the adjuster, not yet with all supporting documents, but just to give him a heads up, is $1,219,837.64. Again, there's some missing transportation that we're going to end up having. There's additional staffing. The building number may change a little bit. So this is what we have as of yesterday afternoon. So there were some timeline and transportation questions. So how long will the insurance cover temporary transportation and other temporary expenses? There's not a timeline for this. I am not going to close this claim until I am confident that we have been reimbursed everything that is as a result of these damages. So because we're doing additional work, it makes it a little more complicated. We've got to really separate that out from the other ceilings. The insurance will not cover ceilings that were not damaged. But they will cover eligible expenses, those that were directly caused by the specific ceiling collapse and the resulting water damage, for as long as it reasonably takes to repair those damages. So those collateral costs, those transportation costs, will be covered to the extent that it is, we can tie it into that the damaged portion of the building. The expected timing and amount of, oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Megan, those transportation costs, you know, no further deductions for deductible, whatever, they're all part of this one claim. And so is it dollar for dollar, or is there a percentage or something when you're looking at those costs?
So those would be dollar for dollar. There is some question as to whether 100% of those costs are going to be reimbursed. Generally, they would be, but because we're doing additional work in the school, there may be some pushback as to whether some of the additional work that's being done in the school is causing us to have the students out for a longer amount of time. So, you know, I'll make the argument that we be reimbursed as much as we possibly can for the transportation costs, but I do foresee the carrier pushing back a bit on the timeline, that it may take longer to do this work because we are demoing and doing other classrooms as well.
Thank you.
So the expected timing and the amount of insurance reimbursements. I showed you on the third slide back. I can just go back for a second so you can see it. That net claim is guaranteed so far. We will get more back. I'm confident that we will get everything besides that deductible and that depreciation for the building back that's tied to the event. Anything that is resulting from that event, we will get back. I don't have that number as of now. I don't think we quite have that number even on the Board of Ed side yet. So as soon as we have that information, I'll pass it along and they will reimburse us for those resulting damages. So the information is still being uploaded in the shared documents. And I appreciate that the Board of Ed has me on that shared document. That gives me live updates. And as soon as everything is put in, I can pass it along. So it's a much quicker and more efficient way to do it. They've been great about capturing those costs and allowing me to get as much reimbursement as possible for the town. So I've requested a partial payment in the amount that I mentioned earlier, $630,183.73. And as I said, the adjuster's out this week. So as soon as he returns, I will follow up again on that.
So thank you for the thorough presentation. Would you please send that to Roland so he can distribute it to the BET members?
Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry, I kind of put it together quickly yesterday, so I will certainly get that to him. Do you want me to continue sharing my screen for the slides, or do you want me to go back to? Does anyone want to go back to any slides?
Well, Jeff has his hand up, so I'm going to call on Jeff. I assume it's about this presentation. Jeff?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a couple things. If we need to rent space for any reason, is that included in the coverage as well?
Rental space would be included to the extent that it is tied to the damages. Yes.
Okay, and the collateral damage, I don't know exactly what that consists of, but that's a covered cost as well?
Yes, rental, transportation, and we did, I don't believe we had rental costs with COSCOB, but we did have transportation expenses. So we have done this in the past.
And mitigation expenses, that's a covered cost?
Yes.
I was interested in the depreciation. I mean, some policies are a replacement cost, but our policy is not for a replacement cost. It allows for depreciation.
It allows for depreciation, yes.
Okay.
And that did happen in COSCOB as well.
Okay. And is it worth, lessons learned, is it worth our having coverage at a slightly greater premium that calls for a full replacement cost?
That is something that I can, you know, I'm doing renewals right now, looking into, and we're kind of revamping the whole program and looking at everything much more closely this year. And that is something that I will discuss with the broker. Yes.
With the audit committee or whatever. Discuss
and the audit committee, yes.
With Gallagher, and then discuss it maybe with the audit committee or something.
Yes.
Okay, no, that's all. Thank you, Megan.
So, Andy or Leslie, do you have any questions or would just we
Not on
can,
the insurance.
we can bring down the share screen if you don't have any. Andy has no,
Okay.
Leslie, do you have any questions?
No, not on the insurance portion.
Okay, Megan, so thank you so much. I think you may want to, hang on here, but I think we can, thank you for bringing down the share screen. And if you just send that to Roland, that would be great. So continuing on here, do we have further questions? Leslie, you wanted to come back to you on costs, is that correct?
Yeah, I just wanted to refine my understanding of the costs as presented on the documentation. And this may touch a little bit on where Leslie was going before, but the only actual invoice that you have received and have paid for is that first one, $189,731. The rest of the numbers on these pages are all estimates. Is that correct? I don't see, is Sean still?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I
Okay.
think, yeah, the 189, I think we've been invoiced already for.
Okay, and the way that you've separated the cost, just so we understand it, you have the cost for the demo separated from the cost of rebuilding.
Correct.
And so all the rebuilding are estimates. The rebuilding in the damaged classrooms is just repairing the structure of the classroom. Does the furniture or other items that might have been damaged as well, that will fall in your other category?
You mean as far as like furniture and fixtures, that would be in the
Yeah.
other category, yes.
Okay, and that's just the damaged pieces. All right. And so, I mean, the differential in the estimate you have for the damaged area versus the preventative spaces, the classrooms that were not damaged, it is a pretty big differential in the cost estimate. But
Yeah, you got to look at the mix of the square footage, so it's, as I said earlier, it's 16,250, and as Dan mentioned, that in some of those areas in that 16,000 square foot, the damage is minimal. So it wouldn't attract a $312 per square foot price. It would attract something significantly less than that if it's minimal.
I guess the logic, though, that we're maybe not following is if you don't have to replace, you're replacing less things in a damaged classroom, but in those classrooms, in the preventative classrooms where you're replacing primarily the ceiling structure, is more of the space being disrupted by the construction than what you had in the damaged classrooms.
Dan, you want to get that?
That's absolutely correct.
Yep.
In every room to do this preventative work where we have to take the plaster ceiling down, everything comes out of the room, including IT equipment, the hung ceiling, all the infrastructure above the hung ceiling, the lighting, the sprinklers, the HVAC, the electric, all that comes out. Then the plaster ceiling is removed, and I'm going to say this surgically. You can't just go in and expect that ceiling to fall, although it very well could. We have to go in and shore up the ceiling and take it down surgically, meaning when they were taking it down, they were cutting out sections that were 2 foot by 2 foot. That's how heavy it is. And they have to do it cautiously and carefully. That's a big expense.
All right, and that's shown up separately in the demo lines, which you separated from the restoration line. Right, so yes, the demolition of the same kind, approximately same square footage is more than twice the cost of the damaged classroom. So I understand that now based on your explanation. The rebuilding cost, though, can you give me what the same explanation is of why there's such a big differential in the rebuilding of the preventative classrooms versus the damaged classrooms?
The damaged classrooms, like Sean and I had alluded to, don't necessarily mean there's that amount of damage in the rooms. like I said, 100 feet away, there was damage, but it could be limited to water intrusion on a sheetrock wall that is cut out and replaced very quickly, very inexpensively.
So is it fair to assume that you're being very conservative, not knowing what you will need to repair in the preventative classrooms in the cost estimate?
I think we're being very conservative. And like I said, I hope it doesn't come out at $317,000.
Right.
I mean, $317 per square foot.
All right. So I think just to my colleagues, clearly we don't have a lot of information about the actual costs that are going to be required here. Clearly the scope of work at a minimum that they're proposing needs to be done. I know other people may have questions as well, but when we get to a final vote on this, I'm going to propose that we condition probably a substantial amount of this money subject to the details that they're getting from the estimates that they'll get in 6 weeks or so. But that will give us all comfort that we have better understanding of the expenses. What I want to make sure is when we get to that point that the Board of Ed has access to all the funding that they need to get to that point in time, both on paying invoices that they're going to have, paying the advisors that they have, the engineers, et cetera, to get there. But I think by using a condition, so they're coming back just to the BET to better refine that $5 million may give us all a little bit more comfort in approving the sum.
So do we have any more questions, Andy or Jeff, before we get to that discussion?
No, not for me.
Andy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question for Sean. I'm looking at the one-page estimate of interim appropriation request. What would be the timing for expenditures that are identified here? I know it's all subject to, but certainly you've incurred already the 189. These other initial estimates, I assume you'll be incurring before June. The balance will be incurred over the course of the summer and possibly into the fall. Is it possible to put a timeline on this, or is this way too premature to do that?
Well, I mean, I think Dan kind of covered the timeline of getting a design and then, RFP documents. And, I think it's been concluded that we're looking at starting work in summertime, sometime in the summer, based on getting the design done and the RFP out there, choosing a vendor, and all the things that go into that, such as the legal review and so on. So
just to add to that, though, we're trying to best position ourselves to be able to sign a contract as soon as all of that is done, as soon as the lowest cost responsible bidder is identified, as soon as the town legal department has signed off on the contract. So we need to have the funding in place to do that.
Thank you.
So following on from Andy's question, so the work, the emergency response, remediation, et cetera, that's been spent. There is an estimate to rebuild the damaged areas. The estimate for the demo for the preventative and both on the first and the second floor, when do you plan to get that work completed?
That work is ongoing. We have about, I would say about a third of the second floor is completed already. We're looking to, maybe half the second floor is completed. I haven't been up there today.
Okay, thank you. And then, and so I assume that will be over the next 2 or 3 months. And then and there are other ongoing expenses. So, I think in terms of, looking ahead, what we can do. Also, when do you think you can come back to us and talk to the BET about, the revised plans and maybe the initial, at least estimates as put together by, I assume, Pasola will have a cost estimator, et cetera, et cetera. When do you think that information will be available?
I'm trying to get it hopefully to you within the next 5 weeks. If not-
Okay. So I think that, again, as you know, we hold our regular monthly meetings. The next one is April 13th next week, which is obviously much too soon. But I think we've also shown that we're also very willing to hold a special meeting when needed. So are we ready to begin to talk about our next steps here? We have two different things we need to talk about. One is the appropriation itself, and the other is the bonding resolution. So should we start with the appropriation?
If I could make, I can make a motion, but let me ask a question first to Sean or Dan. If we were to condition a portion of the, if I look at the calendar, you talked about having a bid packet 5 to 6 weeks, so the earliest might be May 12th. And then you talked about a bid process, which might be 4 to 6 weeks. That puts you into the middle of June, where you'll have more information. Question is, how much, what funding does the Board of Ed need to, maybe it's really to complete this fiscal year for this project? You've got expenses and bills you expect to come in, I guess, for the first few line items here. And it's really that 5 million plus contingency that is uncertain. So I'm asking if we were to condition a portion of funds, if we condition, is it 5 point, wait, where's my notes? Something like 5 million, does that, or 5.5 million, does that leave you enough funds to operate?
It's the question of the day, isn't it?
So
Another question might be to reverse it and talk about, what you have to have prior to the fiscal year end. So is that fair enough, Leslie? The 189,731? Is it the 628,834? And the
I think they're going through demolishing. I think that it's
Well,
really that 5 million.
Andy has his hand up, Leslie, so I was going to call on Andy.
Okay.
Thank you, Leslie. A question for my committee colleagues. If we approve a interim with a condition for the total amount, that means that we can, the BET can just approve, once the condition is met, to approve the full sum. It need not go back to the RTM. Is that correct?
That
Yes,
is correct.
Yeah, it's not a motion yet, but my bias at this point would be just to approve what they need near term. That would be the first 4 line items on the interim request, plus the other items, which would total about 1.8 million. Plus, I guess you have to allocate a contingency to that, which of 20%, and not yet vote on the other $5 million item, which would probably be next fiscal year. In any event, I think by approving just a smaller amount without conditions, and given the flexibility that we have as a BET, and also in the willingness and the interest of the RTM to review this further as they make progress, that'd be the motion I'll be willing to make in this meeting. I'm not making it yet, but I want to get people's reactions before I do that.
So Andy, are you making a motion then for $1.8 million? And should we ask the question, do we need a contingency on that amount?
Can I first respond? Andy asked a question and I said that I was willing to make a motion. I'd like my motion to be heard first. I think that approach is really detrimental to the Board of Education. They have a problem. They have a scope. We know that they need to work on. They're talking to us about their minimal scope of work and moving ahead. If they don't have the funding available to sign contracts, they need to wait for the whole BET RTM process, a 6 weeks process to move forward to go to work on this project. The RTM in May doesn't take up considerations, and they won't have the information in May. They won't even have the information to be able to get onto the June's RTM calendar. So it is, I think, detrimental to the Board of Education to get this school up and operating, get students back in this building, to put in that kind of delay. In these kinds of projects, typically a BET condition usually satisfies the RTM that we will move forward on the basis of the proposal that's been indicated, the scope of work that's been indicated, and the process that the Board of Ed has indicated. And so I would assert that the BET could, and if the RTM could vote not to function that way, they certainly have the right when this comes up in May or comes up next week or in April when they vote on it, not to follow that path. But that is the more typical path we follow, and in this case is really imperative.
So Leslie, I'll just make a comment that I think that normally we have a much more detailed breakdown. And I think we do have a tremendous amount of detail, or a reasonable amount of detail for an emergency project. I think that we should move ahead with that, support, and make sure the resources are available. I agree with you that we want this project to move rapidly ahead. But to get this discussion started, I would like to make a motion that we proceed with an appropriation of, and I'll say $1,800,000 to address the immediate response in terms of the response, the remediation, covering probably more than's needed, the estimate to rebuild the damaged areas, the estimate for the demos on the first and the second floor, and the other anticipated FF&E, security replacement, transportation, staffing, moving, and storage, that totals approximately $1.8 million. And then I would expect that we will be very flexible. So that's my motion. Is there a second?
I second it.
So I think that we will be very flexible in terms of working with the BOE as they move through this project. We all want the children to be back in school as rapidly as possible. The information that's been provided has been, very detailed as to this $1.8 million. Things like the transportation costs, I think were still vague. And so anyway.
So others of us have had their hand up at some point. Would like to be recognized.
Yes, Jeff.
I'm not seeing a setting here in which I'm going to be of a mind not to do the work, the preventive work. And I'm not then understanding exactly why we would be approving just the work on the flooded areas to do the demolition and the restoration. There's expressions like we want to get the children back in place as rapidly as possible, but that's not the path that gets you there. I mean, I assume the most rapid path here would be to collect bids and enter into a contract with somebody to do all the demolition, for somebody to do all of the plumbing replacement, all of the electrical replacement, and all of the replastering and hanging of ceilings on the project. That's the path that gets us there. I could understand that if there's some doubt in our mind about whether or not we want to do the preventive work, that maybe then we would do it piecemeal as is being proposed by the current motion. But I'm not seeing a setting here in which, given what the engineer is saying about the risk with the ceilings and the other areas, I don't see a scenario in which I'm not going to do that work. And if I am going to do that work, then my only concern is that for the moment we have a fuzziness on price because we're dealing with the best estimates from a fairly capable guy like Dan Watson, but he doesn't actually know, and he's not the person who's bidding to do the work. We could approve the 8.1 and condition some of it for us to see and approve the bids. That gives us some sense of control, I guess, about it. I'm not even sure that I necessarily would have needed the condition at all, but I'll be respectful of the fact that, okay, well, let's give him the authority to put out bids. Let's give him the authority to be able to collect the bids, bring them to us. We'll authorize it and then move forward with the work. Now, I'd be grateful for the advice from Dan Watson and others if I'm misunderstanding, but I'm assuming that we want to enter into contracts to do all the demolition, all the restoration, both the damaged area and the preventive area.
Can I identify that Dr. Jones has had her hand up for a while?
Okay, Dr. Jones?
Thank you. I just, I would be remiss, I think, to not advocate on behalf of our children and our families and our staff at North Mianus. And if we do not have the funding approved and ready to go, it will slow the project down. And we don't have a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks to give. We are already pressing up against time. And so I would, I fully understand that you want harder numbers. We're going to get those for you. We fully understand that you may need to condition the funding, which means we can't spend it without coming back to you. But we would ask that, that you consider approving the funding so that we can move forward. And again, we don't have the time to lose on this project.
Okay. So
if, I guess,
I'm not sure who has a raised hand now. Jeff, do you still have your hand raised?
I'm going to propose an amendment to the motion that's on the floor. And the amendment is to approve the $8.1 million subject to the condition of BET approval of the bids. If I'm being advised that they need a smaller sum unconditioned, I'd be open to that. I just don't know what that smaller sum is. But I'm offering that as an amendment to the motion on the floor.
So before I accept that, I think we need to be realistic about the information that's available, setting up a BET meeting to, approve this interim request. It's not set up yet. We need to set up a meeting for them. I think we've shown that we're very flexible in terms of meeting and getting the information and being, reactive and supportive of the Board of Education. I think that Sean knows that, when we have the details and the numbers, that we react very quickly. And we've done our best to accommodate the BOE. And so, I'm just going to, I do want to call on Andy. I see he has hands up too.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am uncomfortable with approving the full 8.1, even subject to a major portion, subject to a condition. I think if we would appropriate up to 1.8 million today, there's lots of flexibility on our part, certainly to reconvene and consider the full 8.1 million as additional information comes in. I also feel uncomfortable not having the RTM also weigh in when we consider the full 8.1 million. So I would not support the Mr. Raymer's motion to amend the motion. And I would not support that, period.
Through the chair, can I ask Mr. Deuce a question?
Yes.
In Mr. Deuce's judgment, is there a setting in which he would not do the work on the preventive areas?
Likely, likely not, but I don't know for certain. And I would like to ideally see more information come in before we would appropriate that.
What information would assist in making that decision?
refinement of our cost information. I don't know, it's to condition the appropriation where for a majority of the 8.1 million is just, I think, it's not necessary. We can appropriate 2 million today and have the people begin the progress, and as more information comes in, we can reconvene. And also working with the RTM, approve the full request, but we don't need to do that today.
And I think also that the timeline that Dan has given, there will be substantially more information. I think the critical thing now is to move ahead on, this does provide money to rebuild the damaged areas, and at least, get started, and to obviously demo both the first and the second floor preventative areas, as well as all of the other costs that have been incurred or anticipated to be incurred through June 30th. In the meantime, I'm sure that Dan will be working with Sean and Tony and Peter in terms of moving ahead rapidly, because that's everyone's goals. And then we'll be setting up the meetings as appropriate. I think it's very important to move ahead on this and get this phase through the BET and the RTM.
So the bidding process that you're asking for is for them to bid just to repair the damaged classrooms, and you're going to ask them to go out to bid separately on the other work later on. Is that what's being proposed? If my motion to amend is not seconded and passed?
It's my understanding that, and I'll ask Dan. Dan, we need the additional work done, the additional design drawings, correct? We've got an amount in there for the estimate to rebuild the damaged areas, correct?
Right.
That's correct. Okay, so that they can get that work done, Jeff. And I think that this is critically important to get this $1.8 million approved and move this forward.
Ms. Tarkington, there are other people with their hands raised.
So I was going to call on you next, Leslie.
Thank you. I just can't believe how short-sighted this is. I would like to say that it's one thing to say the BET can be flexible and meet. However, we've left the Board of Ed hanging for 2 weeks in setting up this meeting, and the full BET hasn't yet set up the full BET meeting. So I'm not sure how flexible we really are. Secondly, the RTM is not that flexible. And to ignore the fact that there is an RTM process, they have a meeting in June and then they don't meet till September. It definitely hampers a timeline if you require that process. The RTM committees, 2 RTM committees voted, maybe more did last night. I didn't get the results of those meetings. The Finance Committee and the Education Committee are comfortable with moving ahead with this project because they know the BET will be the arbiter or will be involved in the conversations and the cost estimates coming from the Board of Education. So talking about necessary involvement, I think you're seeing an issue that RTM members didn't see of 2 committees that doesn't represent the whole RTM, and it's a process that seems to be inconsistent with the way that we have handled these kinds of requests in the past. We have, with a condition, we control working with the BET, but we control the spending of those funds so that if the cost coming in or the scope somehow is different than what's being portrayed to us today, that's a conversation we can have and the work doesn't proceed. I don't think we're giving any confidence to the Board of Ed that they get approval for any construction fund. So what signal are you trying to send today? It's like, okay, we'll take down the ceilings, but we're not going to rebuild the building. There's something missing in that communication in the approach you're taking. Jeff has a motion on the floor. It's a motion to appropriate an amendment to the motion that needs to be taken up. Thank you.
Was that motion seconded?
Yes, it is seconded.
Okay. So I think we will, I think that we will get much more information to proceed, and we'll get it. I'm sure Dan is working on it rapidly. I think it's critically important that we set up the BET special meeting or whatever meeting to get this approved and prior to the RTM. $1.8 million seems like a reasonable number, appropriate number, given insurance proceeds and the other issues that have been raised between now and June 30th. And there is plenty of time to get to the RTM by June.
What is the cutoff? What is the cutoff date for submission for the June meeting? Anybody know?
I'm sorry, Jeff, I don't think I.
There's a submission date on the RTM meetings. I wonder, the May meeting is usually occupied by the budget. They don't like to take other items. I think we'd be talking about the June meeting. I don't know offhand what the submission date on the June meeting is. I'm getting a text saying that it's May 15th.
So,
I assume that to be correct, but I don't know. 12
Right.
noon on May 15th.
and I'm sure there can be a placeholder on that. Are we ready to vote, or do you have any other further comments?
Maybe it's May 21st.
So I would
I think
urge.
I would like a clarification on Jeff's amendment. I believe he's conditioning a certain amount, and he had a question into the Board of Education on what funds they need appropriately until that later point in time on the cost estimate for the preventative work.
What funds are needed, not conditioned, to be able to proceed in an organized way with the work? I wonder if we get an answer to that question, perhaps from Dan Watson or Sean.
Given the drawings that we have today, is that what you mean? Given everything?
Well, given whatever the facts are that they know today, what do they need outright in cash at the earliest possible date, and what can be conditioned, assuming we were of a mind to approve the $8.1 million, subject to condition?
I'll take a shot at it and say, approve the 8.1 million. We certainly will need the emergency response money, the estimate to rebuild the damaged areas, and the numbers for the demo of the preventative areas, plus all the other stuff at a minimum.
You need that not conditioned. If we approved in cash the 189,700 some odd and the 628,800 some odd, that's the emergency work, Werner, and the estimate to rebuild the damaged areas. If we approve those two in the damaged areas, is that enough for you to have funds in cash, and the rest of the bids on the work at the preventive area, we could take a look at the bids and then release funds?
I think we're going to need the demo for the preventative area as well.
Yes.
So,
You're going to put that out to bid and get bids on that.
so is Werner doing the demo? That's my understanding. Is that
Yeah,
not correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
That
that's that we have. Jeff shows that Werner is doing that. And so that, putting together the $1.8 million, it includes all of that. And it includes the other. So, I think it's important that we bring this to hopefully a unanimous vote on terms of moving ahead and being able to move ahead. The date for the RTM meeting is May 21st. I'm sorry?
Mission date.
That's
For the-
submission date.
Submission date for the June meeting, correct. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear.
So I think
So-
it'd be helpful if Jeff could actually, some of our attendees, BET members in attendance, I believe, has their hand raised, or at least one. But I'd like Jeff to restate the amendment.
So I'm proposing that we approve 8,109,027, and that we condition all of it except for the 4 items of Werner, which I believe total 1,445,708. That the balance is conditioned, but 1,445,708 is not conditioned. The condition on the portion that's conditioned is BET review and approval of the bids for the required work.
Can I
Okay.
ask a clarification, only because there's transportation costs, there are things in the other category, I don't know if those invoices need a funding source.
Yeah, we would need that funding. We would need that funding sooner rather than later. So if I had to look at the numbers, if you don't mind me saying,
Please,
the 1.446, Jeff, that you just mentioned,
yes,
if we could apply the contingency on everything except for the 189, which has already been invoiced, and add in all of the other for 357, I think you'd get to about a need of a little over $2 million.
can you come up with a figure, Sean, which I will gladly
Can I-
embrace?
2,055,000.
2,055,000. All right, so my motion would be to amend the motion that's on the floor to be approving the 1,809,027. And I'm conditioning all but the 1,055,000. Is that what you said?
2,055,000.
I'm sorry, 2,055,000.
So,
And the condition is BET receipt and approval of the required bids for the work. Does that work?
Sean, I do have a question for you. What is the difference between the 1,000,008 and the number you just gave? 2 million.
I think the 1,000,008 had the 189, the 628, the 294, the 332.
Right.
Plus the 357, but did not include the contingency, I believe.
I don't think and would you need a contingency of that size? It doesn't,
Well, I don't think we would need it on the first item since we've been invoiced already. So I think we would need it on the others.
so
since they are-
I'm taking a vote. I think it's time to take a vote on Mr. Raymer's motion. Motion to amend. So, and then,
I'm going to beseech my colleagues to join that motion because I think it's the only path that gets the children back in the school seasonably.
I think that the path to move ahead quickly on the project is to take the vote and get the amount approved. And I think the other, we're going to hear more about when the details come in. So Jeff, vote. Andy? Mr. Deuce,
No,
on the motion to amend.
on the motion to amend.
Raymer,
Yes.
Ms. Moriarty?
Yes,
And I vote no. Leslie Tarkington votes no. That motion has failed. So it's important that we move this project ahead.
Okay, so are we back now to the original motion? If I could
Back to the
restate
original
that?
motion and
And that's to approve an appropriation, I guess now of 2 million.
$1,008,000. $1,008,000 was the motion.
The motion was for 1,000,008, but given the additional information that we've heard from Sean about contingency, I'd like to, I guess I have to amend that to, instead of 1,000,008, the motion would be to appropriate 2,055,000 for this.
I don't think we.
What-
We heard that we didn't have to have all of that because some of it's already been bid.
And yes, the 2,055,000 that Sean referenced excludes any sort of contingency on the 189,000.
Correct.
That's already billed. And the expectation here, of course, is as we get more information for the balance of the project, we can easily respond and approve the incremental amount.
Okay, so I will second that motion.
I wonder if the chair would allow some of the other BET members who have hands raised to speak.
And then I think that we're going to take a vote on this. So Is Mr. Deuce's motion to amend? Does it have a second?
Yeah, can I know the figure? May I please note the figure on the motion to amend?
To increase it to 2,055,000.
Mhm.
Does that have a second?
I will second that.
Okay. So we'll take a vote on Mr. Deuce's motion to amend.
So the motion now on the, I'm sorry, if this motion to amend is approved, the motion will be to approve 2,055,000, period.
For immediate use, correct?
And it's not proposed that there be a condition on those sums, any part of those sums.
No condition.
Okay. So what's appropriate now is the vote on the motion to amend. At some point, I would like the chair to be honoring raised hands from BET members who are attendees.
Those raised hands started after our motions, and we don't normally do that, Jeff. So.
That is not correct. Ms. Cromick had her hand up earlier.
So we're taking a vote on Mr. Deuce's motion, which on Mr. Deuce's
Motion.
amendment to the
Maybe
motion
his emotion too, but motion will do for right
Wait.
now.
was seconded. So those in favor.
Aye.
Aye.
So Mr. Deuce votes yes.
Yes.
Mr. Raymer votes.
Yes.
I have to abstain because I can't in good conscience not provide the BET with the full amount of funding that they need. However, I do recognize that they need something, so I don't want to vote against this, but this is just appalling.
I share that sentiment, but I feel like I need to vote in favor.
So I will also abstain, and that vote is 2-0-0.
202.
Excuse me, 2-0-2. I'm sorry. I made a, so,
So if Mr. Raymer changed his vote to no, does it not pass? But anyway, okay.
No, if I voted no,
votes.
it would fail. If I
would fail.
abstained, it would pass.
okay. So, do we take a
So,
vote?
yeah, so now we
do we
vote on the motion, the original motion as amended.
Original.
Now,
mo-
this was, the motion wasn't amended, right?
It was amended for a dollar amount. It was raised from 1.8 million to 2.055 million.
Got it.
So I'll take a vote on this motion. Mr. Deuce,
Yes.
Mr. Raymer,
Yes.
Ms. Moriarty,
I repeat my comment. I'm going to abstain because I don't want to deny the Board of Ed of any money, but this is appalling.
and I will vote yes. So that motion passes for the approval of $2,055,000 by a vote of 3-0-1. And it
I have a
will,
further motion.
it will proceed quickly through the system, and we invite the BOE to come back as rapidly as they can with the more details.
I have a further motion.
I think we finished for the day,
I have a further motion.
Mr. Deuce?
Well, I assume we also have to address the bonding resolution.
Is that what yours pertains to, Mr. Raymer? The bonding resolution?
It would be logical for my motion to precede consideration of the bonding motion.
So I think, Mr. Deuce, are you going to make a motion on the bonding resolution? We'll come back to
Ms.
Mr. Raymer.
Tarkington, Mr. Raymer has requested the floor.
I'd already
I
called
would
him,
like to hear him out. Thank you. He has the right to make a motion.
and I already called him Mr. Deuce, Ms. Moriarty.
Okay, there has been some suggested language in the first paragraph of the bonding resolution. if I may read it into the record here. This is on the second line.
Are you making a motion to?
I'm making a motion to amend the language in the draft bonding resolution.
Well, would it be a good idea to
If-
first
Uh,
move the bonding? I'm sorry, to first move the bonding? I see Roland down there.
Sorry.
Move the
The
bonding resolution for
has
an amount
already,
of 2,000.
the language, we can change the amount, but the language has gone to bond council and come back.
I think Mr. Deuce is going to propose an amendment to the dollar amount.
Well,
Yeah,
I was
Maybe
gonna
it was
change-
bigger than that.
Mr. Geiger recommends, advises that I cannot do that at this juncture. Anyway,
You-
the bonding amount should reflect what we just approved. Obviously, we can increase it later this year when we do increase the ultimate monies going to for this project. But instead of referring to 8.1 million of bonds, it should refer now to the 2,055,000 amount that was just approved.
Is there a second to the,
I would second that motion, including the revision of the dollar amount.
okay? Do we have any comments on this? Okay, I'll take a vote. So Mr. Deuce,
Yes.
Mr. Raymer,
Yes,
Ms. Moriarty,
I continue to abstain in protest.
and Leslie Tarkington will also vote yes.
may I be recognized, please, for a further motion?
And I was going to call the vote on this first, Jeff?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, of course.
So the vote on the bonding resolution is 301. Jeff?
I would move the appropriation of an additional $6,054,027 conditioned on BET review and acceptance approval of the bids on the remaining work.
Is there a second on that?
Yes, second. Sorry.
Okay. Should we take a vote on that?
If there's no discussion, yes,
Okay, Mr. Raymer?
I'm voting yes. Are you calling for a vote at this point?
Yes.
I'm voting yes.
Ms. Moriarty?
Yes.
Mr. Deuce?
No.
And Ms. Tarkington, no. That motion fails. So, we're going to move this the process, and we encourage the BOE to move quickly ahead with their plans so that we can make sure that we support the remainder of this project and get it onto the RTM call as quickly as possible before they move for summer break. So I'm sorry, are there hands up now?
There have been hands up for quite a while.
Your hand is up, Jeff. Is it up or down?
I'll take my hand down, but I'd be grateful. That's just a mistake, but I'd be grateful if you'd call on some of the BET people who've been asking an opportunity to speak.
And
By the way, Mrs. Moriarty has her hand raised. She, I believe, is a committee member.
is your hand raised, Leslie?
My hand is raised, which to request the chair call on the BET members as attendees who would like to speak.
I think we're ready to adjourn. I think we're ready to adjourn. We've discussed this fully, and
So an adjournment usually requires a motion.
I move we adjourn.
I
I
second that.
intend to vote against the adjournment because I think the business of the meeting is not concluded. And the adjournment will require a majority vote. A 2-2 vote won't adjourn the meeting.
I vote no.
I vote no. Maybe you'd like to call on the BET members who would like to be heard.
I will call on Ms. Crumack. because Ms. Moriarty said her hand up was up before. So Ms. Krumik? My,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
yes, I hear you.
Having having sat through this meeting, I am truly appalled. I'm saddened that
I'm can
members
talk-
of the BET are treating other members of the BET the way you are. You are making an attack on public education. Make no mistake, there is no good reason to postpone the full amount that's being requested by the Board of Education and the Greenwich Public School Administration. They are doing their jobs to the best of their ability in order to put children back into the schools after a year's pandemic has already created a problem in terms of children's education. For you to sit there and make it sound like somehow they're not going to be giving you the numbers and the information going forward is a lack of support for our Greenwich public schools. These are people who are engaged at a high level in giving the best possible quality education to our children. And yet what we're seeing
Thank you,
is
Beth.
a sadness. No, Leslie, you are trying to run this meeting so that you don't have any input from other people. And I think that's wrong. We are members of the same board and we are deeply concerned at the way the public schools are being treated. They need this money in order to put children back into the classroom. The fact that you are dealing with professionals and you are not giving them the respect that they deserve, I find very sad, and I hope that it changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. And I think that we have shown the support and we encourage, we're, setting up the BET meeting, getting that approved, and I believe we are showing the support and we are working and we encourage the BOE to come back as quickly as possible with additional information.
I must
So
have missed that part of the meeting. Mr. Weisbrod has his hand raised too.
this was after the vote was held, Jeff. I mean, really, I accommodated you, and so.
It was not after the vote was held. It was after the motion was made, but before the vote. And I think to give the courtesy to BET members to speak at this meeting is justified. We won't adjourn until you allow BET members to speak.
Moriarty. It was after the vote was made, and we don't normally do that. We do that before, and those hands were not raised. So I would like to bring the meeting to adjournment. I did,
Please allow Mr. Weisbrod an opportunity to speak.
Mr. Raymer, I did do what I said I would do, and I would appreciate your support to adjourn.
I'm not going to vote in favor of an adjournment until you finish the business of the day, which I think includes allowing BET members to speak. Mr. Weisbrod has his hand raised. Please allow him to speak.
So David, can you speak? And please keep to facts, not, this is very unconventional. But please keep the facts.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
I don't see Mr. Watson on at this point. Is he still on? Mine is really in the form of a question.
We had already called the vote, David, before you raised your.
No, but it's going to come to the full BET for a vote, and we may not have these people from the Greenwich Public Schools.
I assure you they will be available.
I'd like to ask, please, you did give me the floor, and I'm not now going to ask a question of Mr. Watson. First of all, I as an individual member of the BET,
Question.
somebody has a dog in the background. My question for Mr. Watson is, first of all, I'd like to say I deeply regret that, you've been subjected, you in particular, but all of the GPS.
Sorry, Mr. Weisbrot, that's out of order.
Please don't tell me what's out of order. Don't you dare tell me what's out of order. Now, Mr. Watson, my question is, this vote that's being taken today, can you articulate if and how this may affect delay in getting our children back in the school? Could you please help us and help the community understand that?
I don't want to speak out of line. I just from past experiences, any condition or any obstacle that's put in front of a project that would lead us to get into additional meetings for additional approvals is going to delay any project. So that's my main concern. If we don't have the money in place, going to contract is going to take an additional time to get the monies approved so that we can go to contract. Those are my concerns.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate your comments, and thank you, David.
Well,
Motion to,
this, Andy, can I propose once again a motion to adjourn?
is there a second to that motion? Mr. Raymer, we've accommodated you now twice.
Thank you. I will second the motion and I'll get you off the hook.
Okay. Those in favor? Oh,
Aye.
wait a second. Well, I haven't called the motion yet.
I'm
So
sorry. I heard you say all in favor, but that's all right.
Fasciolotis speak, since we had the other,
Absolutely.
that was, Ms. Fasciolotis. You, I want to make sure you are. Are you there, Karen?
Here, I'm sorry. Just a quick comment. Before you adjourn, I just wanted to thank the Board of Ed for taking the time to come out. I was a little disappointed in how this meeting devolved, and I will say devolved, not evolved. The process that we're doing here, I think, is a process that's followed, and I understand the necessary, the concern about expediency and getting this done. I don't think that the process that's in place and the motion that was passed today will necessarily delay that process. I think that it will allow us to act with the full information that will be provided to us once there's a time for Mr. Watson and the other members of the Board of Ed to understand fully the scope of the project, so that we can get the full information to the RTM. I also wanted to state that while the RTM does not necessarily do non-budgetary matters in May, there is precedent for it. It's been done in the past. I think that it will need some communication with the RTM leadership and others. Also, the May 21st deadline, there can be a placeholder put in place if it goes to the June meeting without the full information. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And like you, I'm very grateful to all the members that participated today. thank you, Dr. Jones and Chairman Bernstein. And also, my thanks to the always very responsive Sean O'Keefe, does a great job, and Dan Watson, who's, obviously had his hands full already and is taking on this project in a highly professional manner. In terms of Megan, she's been on the call since day one in this project, and I think it's great cooperation between the town and the BOE. She was very complimentary, but I also have to be very complimentary of Megan to keep this moving. I expect that same kind of teamwork is going to continue. I'm also, grateful to Ms. Moriarty. She is a, strong supporter of the schools, and we've worked hard together on supporting the schools as well as on many of these other things. Mr. Raymer, who is always an advocate for education, Mr. Duke, and too. So I think that we are here to support.
I'm killing myself.
Below this is indicated, there is some flexibility perhaps in the RTM timeframe, and we will be working together, and I'm sure there's lots of communications. So shall I continue to take the vote on the motion to adjourn? I think Mr. Deuce said yes.
No, I have my hand raised. I believe Mrs. Moriarty does as well.
Okay, Mr. Raymer?
So there's no question, of course, that the process that we've embarked upon today will add considerable delay under any scenario that I can imagine. It will also undoubtedly, to my mind, produce additional cost, because I see what's going to have to happen here is a process of putting out bids for a part of the work and then later bidding for another part of the work, and that's going to result in higher cost. And all of that for no ostensible benefit to the town. I see no scenario in which any member of the BET is going to vote against doing the preventive work in the unaffected parts of the school. Nobody wants to be responsible for children sitting in a classroom in which the ceiling comes down as a result of what the school is going to go through with the concussions of the demolition work that has to be done on the damaged areas. So it seems to me that this was not a purposeful process. I heard all the nice remarks about how we support getting the children back to the school at the earliest possible date. What I didn't see is actions which in fact support that purpose. Very disappointing to me. I think that's exactly the flavor in which I have to leave it.
Okay, so Mr. Raymer, you had already voted yes to adjourn. Mr. Duke voted yes to
So
adjourn.
you said to us that you hadn't called the motion, as
And
I
then
recall.
I was going to call on you. I just wanted to make sure that we reconfirm Mr. Raymer has finally spoken his last words. Ms. Moriarty.
Yes, I wanted to add to Mr. Raymer's comments, which were very well put, and share my sentiments. I also say that the action taken by this board today totally ignores the impact on our administrators, which have had a tremendous burden placed on them this entire fiscal year, dealing with educated students and dealing with staff issues during the COVID environment. They didn't ask for this facility emergency. They are not asking for excess funds that they wouldn't spend to restore the spaces. So to put this additional administrative burden on them when they're trying to deliver the education, trying to figure out how they are going to, where they're going to house the North Mariana students next year, I think is harmful for the work that we're trying to accomplish within the town.
Okay, great. So Ms. Moriarty, are you ready to vote?
I am
on-
ready to adjourn.
Okay. So again, Ms. Moriarty, and so I will just thank everyone. This has, really been hard on all of us this whole COVID year. So I too am ready to adjourn, and I vote yes. And it's now 2:15. I mean 2:15, 11:15. Feels like 2:15. Thank you.